the middle of the room because we have a lot of people here, praise the Lord. And so just trying to fit everybody. So thank y'all so much. And as you do that, you can go ahead and stand and join us in worship. Let's just praise our Father in heaven for what He has done and who He is.
Till from heaven you came.
day the stone rolled away from the door. When he arose over death he had conquered. Now is ascended, my Lord evermore. Death could not hold him, the grave could not keep him from rising again. Living he loved me, dying he saved me, buried he carried my sins far away, rising he justified freely forever. One day he's coming, oh glorious day, oh glorious day, oh glorious day. One day the trumpet will sound for his coming. One day the skies with his glories will shine. Wonderful day, my beloved, when bringing my Savior Jesus is mine. Living he loved me, dying he saved me, buried he carried my sins far away, rising he justified freely forever. One day he's coming, oh glorious day, oh glorious day, oh glorious day, oh glorious day. Y'all bow your heads and pray with me. Man, Lord, I just love that song. It's the whole gospel, Lord. Lord, you are in heaven in all your glory. You decided to come down and humble yourself as a man. Why? Why would you do that, Lord, when all of heaven is praising you? That was literally your life. But you came down as a baby because you love us, Lord. When you saw us in our sin, you knew that we couldn't save us, Lord. You say in your word that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved, Lord. We praise you for that, Lord. I pray that if anyone doesn't know you in here, that you will just convict their hearts, Lord, and help them to see that you are Lord, whether we believe it or not, Lord. I thank you for Dr. Turek and just the wisdom that you have given him. Lord, I pray that you'll just be with him tonight. Lord, just speak through him. Lord, give us ears to hear what you want us to hear tonight. Just tune out all the distractions. Lord, we love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen. Y'all may be seated.
Good evening, Tech. I'm either losing my voice or going through puberty right now. Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward, chest first, onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's High School in Garden Grove, California built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, Zumwalt class. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. Don't religious people tend to embellish things? And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How many people in this room or out there on the internet sitting at home have seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Why? Because it doesn't happen. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something that none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah, it's actually from our TV show on Wednesday nights, DirecTV channel 378. How many people here have DirecTV? Can I see your hands, please? 4 of us. Come on, friends, don't let friends watch cable. All right, how many have Roku? You can see it on Roku. Look for NRB TV on Roku. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Louisiana right now. It's called the internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, it's on our website, crossexamine.org at that time. We're on radio every Saturday mornings. Now here it's 9 a.m. Now I know if you're a college student, you don't get up until the crack of noon on Saturday, so you're not listening to it then. It's on the American Family Radio Network, but it is also podcasted. It's called the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. You can listen to it anytime you want. What we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it based on our ministry, crossexamine.org. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. This is going to serve as our outline here tonight if my voice holds out. If not, we may stop after like 1 point. We'll see. First question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because people say there's no truth. You got your truth. I got my truth. Well, if there's no truth, Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either, right? In fact, if there was no truth, would you ever read a book? Would you ever go to college? Would you ever go to school? Of course you're here to learn truth. And by the way, if there was no truth, could you ever catch someone in a lie? I mean, lies presuppose truth, right? We'll get to that first. Second question, does God exist? Christianity can't be true if there's no God. I hope to show you tonight through 3 arguments that God does exist. These arguments are taught in the Bible, but you don't need the Bible to know them. You can establish that God exists without any reference to any religious work. Third question, are miracles possible? People don't believe in miracles. They don't think they happen. They haven't seen them. Nobody's seen the resurrection. How can we believe in such a thing? Well, I hope to show you tonight that the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the evidence for this miracle. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? Particularly with one event from the ancient world. And that event is the event that either makes or breaks Christianity. What is that event? Does anyone know? The resurrection. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, game over, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, if you're a Christian, your faith is in vain, as Paul said. He says it in his first letter to the Corinthians. You shouldn't believe this if he didn't rise from the dead. Do you realize Christianity is a religious worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it's true? It's not someone's philosophy. It's based on an historical event. Did it happen or not? We're going to look at it. And we're going to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? You guys ready to go? That's it?
Yes!
All right. Now, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, "You can't handle the truth." One guy got it right. The rest of you are sissies. Because he didn't say it that way. Here's how he said it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try it again. I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't you always want to do that at college? You can't handle the truth. Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth, all truth is relative. Well, if you don't get anything else out of what we talk about here tonight, this next few minutes, I think, is the most important thinking skill you can learn. I did not know it until I was 33 years old. I already had a master's degree, and I didn't know what I'm about to show you now, and it's the most important thinking skill. You know why I never knew it? I never had a course in logic. How many people have had a real course in logic? Can I see your hands, please? Thank you, homeschoolers. Here they are, right here, right here. If we taught logic in public school, the nation would be in a lot better shape. Now, this thinking skill will help you discover what is false. It will help you discover what violates the law of non-contradiction, a fundamental law of all logic, which says opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. And it's important to discover what is false. Why? Because if you start believing false principles, you're going to smack up against reality, and it's going to hurt. So let's look at some of these false statements you hear all the time and the technique you use to discover them. And the easiest way of doing it is to show you how to use the technique. Suppose someone were to say to you, there is no truth. The postmodern relativistic claim. What question would you ask them? Is that true? Yeah, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everybody see this is a self-defeating statement? Can everyone see that? It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say that, what would you say? You just used English to say it. It violates the law of non-contradiction. Now here's the thinking skill. What you want to do is you want to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So if somebody says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you ask, is that true, right? You don't have to be unkind to do this. You just have to ask questions. Let's do a few more. Suppose someone says all truth is relative. If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask back?
Is that a relative truth?
Mike, you got this down. Yeah. Is that a relative? Give other people a chance, okay? Is that a relative truth? No, it's an absolute truth claim, claiming all truths are relative. Again, it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Or it's like saying my parents had no kids that lived. Right? Or my brother is an only child, right? These are self-defeating statements. They can't be true. Now, actually, in our culture, now it's probably said more like this. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You know, you got your truth, I got my truth. You live your truth, I live my truth, we'll all get along. It sounds so right. It sounds like we all ought to believe this, right? It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? Like everybody ought to believe this. There's just one big logical problem with it. If somebody says there isn't the truth, only my truth, if you turn the claim on itself, you're going to simply ask them, is that just your truth or the truth? Look, if this statement up here is just your truth, in other words, it's just your personal opinion, well, then why should I believe it? But if you're claiming this statement up here is the truth, well, the first half of the statement says there aren't any the truths. Can everybody say that? Can everyone see this is a the truth statement, claiming there are no such thing as the truth statements? It's logically self-defeating. I know this is very unpopular in our culture to say, but there's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. If you're going to say you've got your own truth, you might as well say I have my own math. I mean, imagine if Kevin, who runs the BCM here, said, hey, Frank, can you stay an extra day? Because tomorrow I need some help around the ministry here. If you stay, I'll pay you $10 an hour to do some work around here. And you just tell me how many hours you worked, and I'll pay you. No, actually, Kevin would never do this. He doesn't pay that much. But let's suppose I stayed, and after a long day, he said, okay, how much do I owe you? Well, let's see, I worked 15 hours at $10 an hour. You owe me $150,000. He's going to go, what? I don't owe you $150,000. I owe you $150,000. Oh, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. What's he going to say? You're crazy, right? There's no such thing as your math or my math. There's just the math. There's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's just the truth. Now, sometimes it isn't said this way. Sometimes it's said this way. It's true for you, but not for me. Well, Christianity may be true for you. Buddhism's true for me. What do you say to that? This is also self-defeating. It's just a little bit more subtle. If somebody says it's true for you, but not for me, you simply want to ask, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you, but not for me, true for everybody? Because it's true for you, but not for me is true for everybody. Then true for you, but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know this can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. Let's suppose you're driving down the highway at 100 miles an hour. Highway 20 right here. Cop sees you, pulls you over, walks up to your car, knocks on the glass. You put the window down, he says, you were going 100. It's easy to get out of a ticket. You simply say, ha, that's true for you, but not for me. And you speed away. You can't give you a ticket if it's not true for you. No, if it's true you were going 100, that's true for all people at all times and all places when referring to you at that time. And by the way, if God exists and Jesus rose from the dead, that's true, whether you believe it or not. By the way, if God doesn't exist or Jesus didn't rise from the dead, it's false, whether you believe it or not. You know, I go to a lot of churches. I normally ask people, do you think Christianity is true? And most people will say yes. And then I'll ask them why. Do you know what answer I get more than any other? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead? No, your faith doesn't change a thing about those things. I mean, do you have to believe something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. I just noticed there's a disco ball up here. What kind of BCM is this, Kevin? Boogie Christian Ministries? What is this? I've totally lost my train of thought now. Okay, so why is the Bible always talking about faith then? Because there's two kinds of faith. This is a very important distinction. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the people who wrote down the documents are telling us the truth. That's what we call apologetics. Doesn't mean we're saying we're sorry. It means we're giving evidence for what we believe. It comes from Peter's first letter where he says, always ready to give an answer for the hope that you have. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you got to go from belief that to belief in. You see, there's a difference. Belief that is just of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, it's of the heart. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, you guys are sharp tonight. James says, even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Do you know that if God exists, and he does, and if demons exist, and they do, that demons know that God exists better than we do? I mean, they're in the spiritual realm. But they don't trust in him. Why? They don't want to trust in him. Because there's a difference between knowing something's true and assenting to it. One is just of the head, the other's of the head and the heart. And we know this in relationships, don't we? In fact, when I first met my wife 37 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. Most of the time when the Bible's talking about faith, it's talking about the second kind. After you know that Jesus is the Savior, trust in him. But if you don't want to trust in him, you don't have to. God will not force you into heaven against your will. If you don't want him now, you're not going to want him in eternity. So there's a difference between belief that and belief in. By the way, faith is not blind. Faith really means trust. The definition of faith is trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. Trusting in what you have good evidence to believe is true. And as we'll see here, there's good evidence to believe that God exists and Jesus rose from the dead, and therefore Christianity's true. We'll get into it a little bit later. Oh, you're going to hear this too. There's no truth in anything but science. What's the problem with this claim? If you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask? You guys are sounding a lot like Charlie Brown's teacher right now. Like, turn the claim on itself. If somebody says there's no truth in anything but science, simply say, hey, is that a scientific truth? Can you go in the laboratory and prove that claim? No, that's a philosophical claim. That's not a statement of science. That's a statement about science. And you can't do science without philosophy. Science is built on philosophy. Why am I saying that? Because all data needs to be gathered, and all data needs to be interpreted. And who does that? Scientists do that. In fact, we have a chapter in the Stealing from God book back there on science. Here's the title of the chapter. Science doesn't say anything. Scientists do. Why do I say that? Because scientists are doing all the gathering and interpreting of the data. You ever wonder why you've got conflicting advice on COVID? You say, follow the science. Whose science? Look, if scientists have good data, they interpret it well, you'll get good advice. If they got good data, don't interpret it well, you're going to get bad advice. If they got bad data, it doesn't matter how they interpret it, you're going to get bad advice. If there's a political agenda, oh, that'll never happen. Why do we think that scientists are immune to the same three temptations the rest of us are not immune to? What are the three great things that we all want that if we don't pursue them properly can destroy us? Sex, money, and power. Those three motivators are great because those are good things. The problem is they're so good we'll often take shortcuts to get them. And I think when you look at the mess our country has been in for the past few years, you realize there's a lot of people pursuing money and power with this whole pandemic thing. And half the time, I don't know what to believe, do you? It's so confusing. And there are some people that are trying to shut up other people, censoring them. And I agree with Dennis Prager. If you're censoring other scientists, you know who's lying? The censors are lying, not the guys who are trying to get what they think is the truth out. So science doesn't say a word. Scientists say things. And sometimes people's philosophical presuppositions cause them to interpret the data in a certain way, even though it appears to be against the evidence. Now, science is important, right? We couldn't live in the South without science. Not very well, anyway. Air conditioning saved the South, right? But science isn't the most important thing in life. I mean, think about the most important things in life. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? I don't know. Let's run an experiment. No! That's not the most important thing. Oh, then you're going to hear this too. You ought not judge. Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrite? All right, let's leave Jesus aside for just a second. What's the problem logically with this claim? Yeah, you turn the claim on itself. If somebody says you ought not judge, you're going to say, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or you might want to say, if we're not to judge, why are you judging me for judging? Now, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did, Frank. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. This is right in the middle of his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. All right. I know it's going to sound weird, but it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography of Jesus, which we now call a gospel, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1. No. When were the chapter and verse divisions put in? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is really important. Why? Because without numbers, it'd be hard to find your way around this big collection of books. I mean, imagine you go to church one Sunday, you don't have numbers in your Bible, pastor doesn't have numbers in his Bible, he gets up to the front and he looks at you and he goes, let's go about 2/3 of the way in, let's see if we can find the same spot. Right? No, you couldn't do that. You need numbers. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. You can't do that. Now, some of you are going to hate me for saying this, but it's okay, I leave tomorrow. This is why you should never claim that Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. What's Jeremiah 29:11? You know the verse, it's everywhere. Oh, the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to give you hope in the future. This is on coffee mugs, this is on posters, this is on pillows, this is on journals, this is on bumper stickers, it's everywhere. And yet, who is it a promise to? What's the context? It's a promise not to 21st century Christians. It's a promise to the exiles in 586 BC that went to Babylon because God said he would bring them back to the land 70 years later. He would prosper them. And yet people are trying to say this is a promise to me. It's not a promise to you. It's written to them, not to us. I mean, if you're going to claim Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you, why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 is a promise to you? Why, what's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is what God promised he would do to the exiles that went to Egypt in 586 BC. Do you know what he said to those people? Because he said, don't go to Egypt. You know what he says? You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a coffee mug. You don't see that on a birthday card. Happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. Well, that is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. Why? Because we're taking stuff out of context. Same thing is true in Matthew 7:1. Jesus doesn't say judge not and stop right there. What does he say? Judge not. Lest you be judged by the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, which is a judgment, notice that. Take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. And then he starts talking about not casting pearls before swine, which is another judgment, right? Is Jesus telling us not to judge here? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. That involves making a judgment. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments just tonight getting over here, and now you're thinking, this was a bad judgment. This guy's crazy. No, why am I here? Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Bible's not telling the truth. There is no objective meaning to life. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? In fact, Jesus in John 7:24 says, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees, by the way? What was their job? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. They were on the Sanhedrin. That's the ruling council to whom Rome delegated much of the day-to-day lawmaking political authority to. They were the politicians of the day. And Jesus went after them. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. And how about John chapter 8? He's talking to these same Pharisees. He's right in the middle of an argument with them when he says, he stops right in the middle and he goes, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ. Can you imagine you have an argument with somebody and you stop right in the middle and you go, your father is the devil. Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus going after these Pharisees again. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes, Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. How many have ever heard anyone preach on those verses? But everyone in this room probably knows those verses are true. Why? Because if you're a Christian, or even if you're not a Christian, people you know are Christians, you're divided over that, aren't you? You're divided over Jesus. He came to bring a sword. So we have to make judgments, but we have to make judgments without being judgmental. And Jesus was very direct and very tough. That's why they killed him, by the way. Number one, he claimed to be God. Blasphemy to the Jews, sedition to the Romans. Number two, he spoke truth to power, particularly the Pharisees and Caiaphas, the high priest, who wanted him dead because if Jesus succeeds, he's out of a job, Caiaphas is. By the way, I've noticed one other thing about judging. You ever notice that when you compliment somebody, which is a judgment, nobody gets upset? You know, if you say to your best friend, I really love you, you're such a wonderful person, I wish I could be like you. You think your friend's going to say, well, who are you to judge? No one's going to say that. I've noticed that people don't have a problem with judging, they just have a problem with judgments they don't like. In fact, if you tell somebody something that's true and they get upset with you, you just help convict them. As Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us, we hate the truth when it convicts us. For you military people in here, and by the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for never again volunteer yourself. For you military people in here, you always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed. Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light. So you have to make judgments without being judgmental. Now, we don't have time to do more of these because we got to keep moving and my voice is running out. I just want to sum this whole section up this way. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? And all the other statements we just went through shoot themselves as well. They're logically self-defeating. Do you know what this means? It means that relativism and postmodernism are false. Why? Because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Sadly, many of our universities and many of our high schools have bought into postmodernism. Why would you spend thousands of dollars a year to have some professor tell you the truth that there is no truth? How does that make any sense? Now, we go to a lot of colleges, and this is actually a picture from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And they love the Bible there about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And we're going to have a microphone set up later for Q&A, and I may ask you a question if you're not a Christian. And it's not fair for me to do that unless I warn you what the question is beforehand, so I'm going to tell you what it might be right now. The question I normally ask people who are not Christians is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no! No? I thought you claimed to be reasonable. How is it reasonable? You wouldn't believe something if it were true. It's not reasonable. It's not a problem in the head, it's a problem in the heart. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God of their own lives. They're not on a truth quest, they're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. And Christians, those you are Christians in here, we do this sometimes too, don't we? We suppress the truth about what's right because we want to do our own things. This is what the Apostle Paul talks about in Romans chapter 1. We want to go our own way. You know, the truth is, most people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. They're not interested. They're running. So always ask the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If the person hesitates or says no, it's not a head problem, it's a heart problem. They don't want it to be true. Now, we know that truth exists. It's self-defeating to say it doesn't exist. So relativism and postmodernism are false. But the next question is it true that God exists, that theism's true? And I said there are three arguments we're going to look at briefly. At least one of them we'll look at very briefly. The first one is called the cosmological argument. It's from the beginning of the universe. Cosmological just comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says that there's design in the universe and design in you, life. There has to be a designer. Now, there's scientific evidence for these arguments. We'll get to a little bit of it here in a minute. Third argument doesn't have any science to it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument you've all known since you were very small children. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says that there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one. Like it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust. Or it's wrong to go into a elementary school and shoot 9-year-olds. Then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity that we're obligated to obey, all that would just be your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion, or your opinion against a child murderer opinion. We know these issues aren't just a matter of opinion. If that's the case, there must be an external standard of righteousness that we're obligated to obey. That standard can only exist if God exists. We'll get to that later, but we got to start at the cosmological argument. You got to admit it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Did you see that? Some of you say, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some of you in here going, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 5 years ago, he was an atheist, but here's what he said. Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, he tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data that space, time, and matter literally came into existence out of no space, time, and matter. It was created. Now, we're not going to go through the evidence for this. Why? We don't have time. It's all in the book, chapter 3, and it's not controversial. Even the atheists are admitting it. I just want to jump to the bottom line right now. If space, matter, and time really had a beginning, as the scientific evidence seems to show, as the philosophical evidence seems to show, that there was a beginning to time, if that's really true, what could have created space, time, and matter? Only something that's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. To go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. The being would also have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't yet. We haven't done enough research yet. This could be Allah at this point, or some other theistic God. We don't know, but we have 6 attributes of what could be the God of the Bible. If we keep going through the evidence and we discover that Jesus rose from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,990 years ago last week, actually just Sunday, is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet, but it appears we have 6 attributes of a first cause from this one argument. Now, as I say, there's a whole chapter on this in the book, but we got to keep moving because we got to go to the next argument, which has a lot more that I want to show you, and that's the teleological argument. And this is the argument that has 2 aspects to it. The universe appears to be designed, and you appear to be designed. Let's look at the universe first. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is fine-tuned. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors about our universe virtually imperceptibly, no universe would exist, or certainly no universe that could support life. And even atheists admit this. In fact, atheists admit this is probably their hardest argument to answer. Stephen Hawking, again, an atheist, said this. If the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would collapse back on itself or never develop galaxies. If the expansion rate was that infinitesimally different from the very beginning, none of us would be here. You can't make any sort of evolutionary explanation for this. You can't say, well, it evolved to this rate by chance, whatever that means. Why? Because this is the initial starting rate. It started there. What could have caused that? Seems to me the same being that created space, matter, and time is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate for us to be here. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't exist. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. Stack the entire North American continent in dimes all the way to the moon. That's about 238,000 miles. And then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. And take all those dimes and put them into one huge pile. Randomly mark one of those dimes red, mix it in the entire pile, blindfold a friend, throw him on the pile, ask him to pick a dime at random. The chance he would pick that one red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he gonna pick that dime? No. Look, there's only two explanations for why that value is there. It was either designed to be there or it wasn't. What makes the most sense? It was designed. You say, maybe chance did it. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Is chance a cause? Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance, he was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. When scientists use the word chance, you know what they really mean? We don't know. This was designed. And these are just two out of like a dozen of these. Change any one of them, we don't exist. And it's not just our overall universe that appears designed, our solar system appears to be designed with us in mind. So let's take a look at the solar system. Here we are, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to it, a little bit further away from the sun, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it is? That's a lie, it's way too hot here in the summer. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours, change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us, change that slightly, we don't exist. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why not? Yes, Jupiter attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these dark marks are? They're comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing. In fact, you want to see the size of the planets? Here they are. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? What then? You bigots. Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. It's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where's Arcturus now? Way over here. You see that? That's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice here would be... Look, I don't name the stars, okay? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Beetlejuice would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. And this is just in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. And all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, how far is 30 trillion miles? Far. It'll take at least 2 tanks of gas and a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. You know when we had the space shuttle, it went around the Earth? It was real exciting. Just kept going around the Earth. Remember that? You know how fast that would go when it was in orbit? About 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. Right? You'll be 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles a second. You know, if we wanted to go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, if we could go space shuttle speed, how long would it take us? Anyone know? A long time. You must be a math major. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. I mean, think about it. If our solar system was the size of a quarter, you know, the sun's in the middle, Pluto's on the outer rim, you know what next nearest star is? It's over 2 football fields away. We're not going anywhere in space. But notice what the psalmist says about space and God's love. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. How high are the heavens above the earth? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope helped us discover that. You see this? I don't know if you can see this. You can see it better over here. You see these are mountains down here? That's the southern hemisphere. Way back almost 20 years ago now, about 20 years ago now, they trained the Hubble Space Telescope on 1/26 millionth of the sky for like 11 days of exposure time. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So they trained Hubble on this to discover what was out there. What I'm about to show you is the video they put together as a result of it. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You can Google this, it's in the public domain. And what I'm going to show you is what they found. When I play this little video, the constellations are going to come up in the southern hemisphere, and then Hubble's going to go zoom out to that one little point. There's no audio. It's just a short video. You guys ready? Here's Hubble Ultra Deep Field. There are the constellations. Let's see what they found. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky. Each of these galaxies apparently has billions of stars of their own. If you find 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky, how many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star going 5 miles a second inside our galaxy will take you over 200,000 years. The heavens are awesome. By the way, I never want to hear anyone at Louisiana Tech ever use the word awesome again unless you're talking about the heavens or God. Awesome shot, dude. Awesome shirt, dude. Awesome TikTok video. No! What word are you going to save for this? There's just one problem. If this, the heavens declare the glory of God phrase that you find in the scriptures, if this is meant to communicate what God is like, we're in big trouble. Why? Because this is meant to show that every attribute of God is infinite, including his justice. Well, if his justice is infinite, none of us are going to make it. There's only 2 things you can get in the afterlife. You can either get justice or you can get grace. Which one do you want? I don't want justice. I want grace. So how is God going to accomplish that? He's infinitely just. How can he allow us to go unpunished? Here's the second half of the verse I didn't show you a minute ago. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. How has he done this? He's infinitely just. He came to earth, put humanity on his deity, allowed the creatures that rebelled against him to torture and kill him so he could take our punishment on himself. And this is why the Apostle Paul, writing to the church at Rome, said, God remains just and is the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. You see, when we say Jesus is the only way, that's not arbitrary. It's not just God saying, he's the only way because I said so. No, it's the only way an infinitely just God can allow unjust creatures like us to go unpunished. He has to punish an innocent substitute, otherwise he doesn't remain just. Now, when you look at a universe that has stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, does that make you feel insignificant? It shouldn't. Why? Because as amazing as the heavens are, they're not made in the image of God, but you are. And this is the second aspect of the teleological argument. Your design. In fact, this is you in the womb at 11 weeks. Question, is this animal, mineral, vegetable, or human? In fact, let's go back even further than 11 weeks. Let's go all the way back to when your mother and your father got together to conceive you. Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. All right? When your mother and your father got together to conceive you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg to attract your father, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg. And then there was a race. And you won! Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special. You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. Now, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, your soldier was 20 to 30 times smaller than a grain of salt, yet it contained half of the 3.5 billion letter software program, your genome, your DNA, all the letters in the right order. And your mother's egg was about the size of a period at the end of a sentence in an average book, and it contained the other half of the 3.5 billion letter genome, your software program, your DNA, all the letters in the right order. And when your soldier and your egg came together, a new 100% genetic human being was created. You know, you have not received any more genetic information from this point till right now. Your genetic information has just duplicated itself. In fact, there were only 4 things separating you from adulthood: time, air, water, and food. Those are the same 4 things that separate a 2-year-old from adulthood. Does this have implications on the abortion issue? Yeah, it does. We don't kill the 2-year-old. Why do we kill the unborn child in the womb? Genetically, it's the same. You say, wait a minute, Frank, you can't legislate morality. All right, no extra charge for this. This was the subject of our first book, creatively titled Legislating Morality. All laws legislate morality. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And when people say, don't impose your morality on me, you know what I say? Why not? Would that be immoral? See, because you're imposing your morality on me right now. You're telling me I ought not impose ought nots, yet you're imposing that ought not on me. Why do you get to impose ought nots, but I don't? Actually, there's a better answer. When somebody says, don't impose your morals on me, what you ought to say is, these aren't my morals. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that men were made for women and women were made for men. And the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said, the Gentiles don't have the law of the law written on their hearts. So look, if you don't like the morality, you don't have a problem with me. I didn't make it up. You have a problem with the Creator upon whose nature this morality is derived. All right, no extra charge for that. Let's go back to this. From this point till right now, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second. Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second. For most of you anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How did they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this day. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million. Knock it off! I mean, are you thinking about this? You're going, wait a minute, Frank, I got to concentrate. New red blood cells coming up. No, this is just happening. How's it happening? Aristotle noticed something 2,400 years ago. Of course, he didn't know anything about blood cells, but he did notice that all of nature is going in a direction. For example, you ever notice that an acorn, if it's properly nourished, always goes in the direction of becoming an oak tree? Why doesn't it become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse? You say, well, it's programmed to become an oak tree. Who programmed it? I mean, is an acorn conscious? Is an acorn in the ground going, all right, what do I have to do to become an oak tree? No! But if it's properly nourished, it's going to go in the direction of becoming an oak tree. If it doesn't have a mind of its own, and it doesn't, yet it reliably goes in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. This is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in the 1200s AD, and he said, this is going to be my fifth way to argue for God, that all of nature is going in a direction. If so, there's got to be a mind directing it. Now notice, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a Big Bang cause way back when. That's another argument. This is a cause every single second you and the universe exists. God creates the universe. He creates the natural laws that govern it. He creates you, and he sustains the universe and the natural laws that govern it, and he sustains you. In fact, God is to the universe what a band is to music. When the band was playing music up here earlier, the band was creating and sustaining the music. What happened to the music the second the band stopped playing? Music was over. Same thing is true with God. He creates the universe, the natural laws, he creates you, and he sustains all that every single second of existence. This is why the Apostle Paul said, in him we live and move and have our being, and Christ holds all things together. And the writer of Hebrews says, God sustains all things by his powerful word. This is, ladies and gentlemen, why we can do science. Why can we do science? Because the world is orderly. It's consistent and persistent. It does the same thing over and over again. If there was no orderer, we wouldn't be able to do science. Now, there's a lot more on that argument in the Stealing from God book, but we got to move on to our final argument for God, and that is the moral argument. And maybe the best way to explain this is to ask you this. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing a pick six? That's when he throws an interception and the other team takes it back for a touchdown. How do you know the touchdown is better, or the interception is better than the, or the touchdown for you is better than the pick six? How do you know that? Not just the rules. You got to know beyond the rules. The purpose, right? You got to know the purpose of the game. If you know the purpose, then you can say the touchdown gets us closer to that purpose. The pick six takes us further away. Now notice, in football, the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. You know, when the Eagles and the Chiefs a couple months ago played the Super Bowl, they showed up there in Arizona, and they didn't make the rules up. The field was already set. Refs were there. Where'd the rules and the purpose come from? Came from outside the game. Commissioner and the owners, every once in a while they tweak the rules a little bit. Comes from outside the game. Now, the rules of football are arbitrary. They can be different. But the rules of life are not arbitrary. They come from outside the game, the creator, but they're not arbitrary. He knows the purpose of life. If there's no purpose to life, you can't say, this activity gets us closer to that purpose, and this takes us further away. So God must exist in order for right and wrong to exist, good and bad to exist. In fact, if there is no God, the Nazis were not wrong. You can't say they were wrong. It's just one government fighting another government. If there's no standard beyond governments, how can you say they were wrong? If there is no God, love is no better than rape. Oh, you might like love better, but that's just a preference. If there is no God, there are no human rights. I don't know if you've noticed this, but every 10 minutes there's a new right invented in America. Do you realize there are no rights unless God exists? There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage. There's not only no right to abortion, there's no right to life. There's no trans rights. There's no white rights or black rights or any rights. There's no rights to anything. It's just your opinion. Unless there's a standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey. In fact, murder, slavery, and racism are not wrong unless there's a God. And we all know those things are wrong. Religious people have never done anything wrong. How many people in here are Christians? How many people in here have ever been called a hypocrite by a non-Christian? You know what you ought to say when somebody calls you a hypocrite? You ought to go, you know what? You're right. I am. But what does that prove? In fact, you've just given an evidence for God. What's wrong with hypocrisy if there is no God? By the way, how many people in here know somebody who's not a Christian because other Christians have been wrong or have been evil to them? Yeah, maybe 40% of us. Historian John Dixon says you ought to ask that person a question. Here's the question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Beethoven. So when someone plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. Look, just because I'm not true and beautiful doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. In fact, we ought to expect Christians to not be perfect because we are fallen. If we weren't fallen, we wouldn't need a Savior. Newsflash, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Also, tolerance is no better than intolerance unless God exists. By the way, are Christians commanded to be tolerant? No, Christians are commanded to be loving. You see, tolerance is too weak. Tolerance says hold your nose and put up with them. Love says reach out and help them. And how do you help people? Sometimes you stand in the way of what they want to do. You don't enable evil. Yet too many Christians are hiding under their desks. In fact, I submit to you that Richard Dawkins, the top atheist in the world, has more courage than most American pastors. Richard Dawkins has talked about the evils of Islam, particularly militant Islam. Hardly ever hear pastors talking about that. Richard Dawkins recently said, I'm sorry, it's science. You can't change your gender. You're either a man or a woman. You can't change that. You don't like it? Too bad. It's the truth. How many times have you heard pastors talking about this important issue that the world's struggling with, and they're silent? Richard Dawkins has more courage than most American pastors. That's sad. That's an indictment on us. Do you guys know who Thomas Sowell is? 92-year-old economist who grew up in Harlem and taught at some of the top universities in the world. He says this: when you tell people what they need to hear, you're helping them. When you tell people what they want to hear, you're helping yourself. Why don't we tell people what they really need to hear? Because we don't want them getting mad at us. You know what we're doing? We're helping ourselves. We're not helping them. We're enabling them. And by the way, if there is no God, you can't complain about the problem of evil. Why? Because if there is no God, there is no evil. Why? You saying God's not doing evil, or God's doing evil? No. God is the standard of good by which we'd even know what evil was. In fact, C.S. Lewis, early on in his life, was an atheist. He went through World War I. He lost his best friend in World War I. He said, there can't be a good God. There's too much injustice in the world. And then one day he had an epiphany. He realized his argument against God didn't work. He ultimately wrote it in the book Mere Christianity. Here's what he said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be not right unless something is right. In other words, there's got to be a standard. Evil does not exist on its own. Evil only exists as a lack in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. It doesn't exist. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. Right? Doesn't exist on its own. In fact, you could look at it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you got to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil. But you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, and we all know it does, you can't go into an elementary school and shoot 9-year-olds. Then God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive. Why wouldn't God stop that? We'll save that for the Q&A. But you can't say God doesn't exist, because it wouldn't be evil unless there was a standard of good, and there wouldn't be an objective standard of good unless God existed. So evil doesn't disprove God. Evil may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God. How many of you guys remember Christopher Hitchens? Years ago, I had a couple of debates with Christopher Hitchens. Christopher was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. You can see these debates on our YouTube channel. This was a picture from our second debate. Of course, he wrote the book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. I kept asking him, what do you mean by evil? This is just he's saying religion's evil. What standard do you have for this? He didn't have a standard. He's stealing a standard from God to argue against him. He has to sit in God's lap to slap his face. And by the way, he has it exactly backwards. Religion doesn't poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. In fact, I said in the second debate, I said, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. I wouldn't need a Savior. In fact, when people say to me, I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal. We got room for one more. Thought church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. Of course we're sinners. Of course we're hypocrites. That's like saying I can't go to the gym because there's too many out of shape people down there. Well, that's why they're at the gym, because they're out of shape. So don't let skeptics keep you out of the kingdom. We should predict that people would be hypocrites. Now, what can we do with these? What can we learn from these three arguments? From the cosmological argument, we can see that the first cause is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent. From the teleological argument, we get more evidence that he's intelligent, and we also see that he sustains the universe. From the moral argument, we see that this being also is moral, that he's a moral standard. Now, from these three arguments, we see that there's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent first cause that created and sustains all things. He's moral, and every attribute is infinite. Now, this is the God of the Bible without any reference to the Bible. We haven't even opened the Bible yet. And we appear to have a being that looks like the God of the Bible. This is called natural theology. You don't need any Bible to know this. The only question is, how do we know it's the Christian God? And for that, we got to go to the third question. You're probably looking at your watch going, Frank, how are you going to finish this? We're running out of time here. Well, number 3 goes really quickly. Because if God exists, miracles are possible. The problem is a lot of people don't think miracles are possible. For example, Noah. Christians, can we just agree on one thing with regard to Noah? Noah and the ark is crazy. It is. I've already asked you how many people in here have seen a resurrection. Nobody raised their hand because those things don't happen. And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, how can you really believe in Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Well, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. And the interesting thing is, even atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. I just showed you one conclusion from Stephen Hawking. Again, he doesn't think it's God, but he's admitting the evidence. Space, time, and matter had a beginning. We could go through evidence and quote after quote to show you this is what most scientists believe, and virtually all philosophers agree. The universe had a beginning. If that's true, every other one of these miracles is at least possible. Of course, Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course, miracles don't occur unless God exists. Of course, Jonah's a fairy tale unless God exists. I mean, if God created the universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the universe? He can do any of these things. Now, here's one problem. A lot of people won't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. That's not a good reason to disbelieve something necessarily. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. Have you ever seen your mind? Now, you believe in it, don't you? You're using it right now. Have you ever seen the laws of logic or the laws of mathematics? No, but you use them every day. You've never seen justice, but you believe in justice. Well, you may have seen people treated justly or unjustly, but you don't see justice in itself. It's an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. It's expressed through action. You've never seen love. Everybody believes in love. Do you know Christopher Hitchens was asked a question in our second debate by some student in the audience who said, Christopher, what is love? And Christopher, being a materialist, thinking that everything's made of molecules, you know, you're just a molecular machine, you're just a moist robot. That's what he believed. He had to come up with a material explanation for love. So he finally said to the student, love is a chemical. And I said, don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. You know, tomorrow I might not have it. No, love is not a chemical. It's a decision to seek what's best for the other person. It's an action. You all believe in it, but you've never seen it in itself. You believe in gravity. You've never seen it. Oh, no, there it is, Frank. It's right there. No, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. You know, that's how we know that God exists. If someone were to ask you, how do you know that God exists? I think you ought to say, I know God by his effects. I'm reasoning from effect back to cause. If there's a creation, and there is, that's the effect. We're reasoning back to a cause, a creator. If there's design in the universe and design in you, life, That's the effect. We're reasoning back to a causative designer. There's a moral law written on the heart. That's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a moral lawgiver. If I have the ability to reason and know truths outside my skull, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause of mind. If there's evidence a man actually predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. I'm reasoning back to a cause. Who could raise somebody from the dead? God. You're always reasoning from effect to cause. In fact, if you think that you've had some sort of spiritual experience with God, you're doing the same thing. The experience is the effect. You're saying the cause is God. This is what scientists do. They're always reasoning from effect back to cause. You've never seen George Washington, yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a cause known as George Washington, who lived from 1732 to 1799. You've never seen Jesus physically either, yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind. You're always reasoning from effect to cause. Now, do you know for atheism to be true, every single miracle experience and spiritual experience in the history of the world has to be mistaken? Is that possible? It's possible. Is it reasonable to believe? No. Every single one has been wrong. Now, miracles are not, modern day miracles are not necessary for Christianity to be true. There could be no miracles since Jesus and the apostles, and Christianity would still be true. I think there have been, but you don't need them for Christianity to be true. In fact, in the Bible, miracles are used to confirm that somebody speaks for God. If you notice, miracles occur in 3 major time periods: Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because God is pouring out signs on these people so the people of God would say, this guy speaks for God. Why should we believe Moses? Because he can do miracles. Why should we believe Jesus and the apostles? Because they can do miracles. But miracles have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. I mean, even if miracles occur today, you're not going to see very many of them. Why? Because if they occurred all the time, they wouldn't be miracles. We'd say this stuff happens all the time. The only way you can recognize a miracle is against the backdrop of regular events that happen over and over again. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody and go, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God, and if you trust in him, you can be saved. The guy goes, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event if it's going to get our attention. In fact, there are things that happen every day in America, every day across the world, actually. They happen every day. We don't call them miracles, but we know there's intelligence behind them. How many people in here have ever seen your own flesh and blood born? Every mother should raise your hand. Only the men should be the ones who... You ever seen your own flesh and blood born? Now, when you see that, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, there's intelligence behind this. It happens every day. We don't call it a miracle, but we know there's intelligence behind it. All right, so what can we conclude now? We know that truth exists, that God exists, that miracles are possible. If God exists, of course, miracles are possible. Now the key question is it true? Is the New Testament telling us the truth, particularly about one major event, and that is the resurrection of Jesus? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Now, in the book, we have the top 10 reasons we know the New Testament writers told the truth. We don't have enough time for that. I only want to look at 2 of them briefly. And one of them I want to look at is something called embarrassing stories. Because I think embarrassing stories show beyond any reasonable doubt these men who wrote this down were not making it up. Why? Because historians know if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why is that? Because you're never going to make stuff up that embarrasses you. You might make stuff up that makes you look good, but you're not going to make stuff up that makes you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad, to embarrass yourself? You don't do that. Well, the New Testament is filled with embarrassing stories they never would have invented. It's true of the Old Testament as well, but we're just looking at the New Testament. That's why we're calling this the dove factor. They're not making this up. Let me just give you a few of them. Peter, the leader of the disciples, is called Satan by Jesus. Do you think they invented this? Do you think Mark at one point who wrote this down said, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of one, they all run away. They're cowards. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? Ladies, who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? No, if I was inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write down something like this. Let's see, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. Peter said, get out. John roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants while the women went down to discover the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say that the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men, it was, but independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Why?
At the time, legally, women were not considered valid witnesses in the courtroom.
Exactly. Women were not considered on par with that of men in a courtroom as witnesses. So if you were making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. In fact, one of the women witnesses was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Oh, gee, what a great credible witness you got there. Why don't we use her as our star witness? No. In fact, I had a lady come up to me once and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get that story out. I said, that is an excellent point. Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, oh, hey, hon, what happened? Oh, yeah, forgot to tell you. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next passage is in the New Testament, but it is. You know the end of the biography we call the Gospel of Matthew? This is the climax of it, the Great Commission. This is Matthew 28:19, where it says, go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. There's a difference. Anyway, it says right there in verse 17, of the disciples he brought up on the mountain there in Galilee to give them the Great Commission. You know what it says of them? It says, some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them. And they're doubting? It's like they're standing there going, see that guy over there? Yep, that guy over there is Jesus. Oh no, he was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you, it's him. Look, the Romans killed him. Jesus is dead. It can't be him. It's him. Do you know the Romans whipped him? They put nails all through him. Then they lanced his heart with a spear. Blood and water came out. And if they didn't kill him, they would have been killed themselves. Jesus is dead. I'm telling you, it's him. It can't be him. It is. It is. It can't be. No way. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. Notice his own brothers don't believe in him. That's embarrassing. In fact, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either, do you? Neither did Jesus' brothers. Jesus is called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented this? He has his feet white with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Tamar plays a prostitute. Now, do you think Matthew, when he decided to put this in the genealogy, he thought to himself, you know what? I really think we ought to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. That'll be good. Rahab, Tamar. No. In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from, Jesus, from the tribe of Judah, not a good guy. What did Judah do? He sold his brother Joseph into slavery, yet he is in the ancestry of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in there. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he won't mention her name. What does he say instead? Uriah's wife. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Who's Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. They're not making this up. And then Jesus is hung on a tree, despite the fact, according to Deuteronomy 21:23, that anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. If you're making up a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. Yet he was hung on a tree. Now, what are the two trees in Genesis? What are the two trees? Tree of life, tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Fast forward all the way to the end of the Bible. The Bible's very symmetrical, by the way. What's the tree in Revelation? Tree of life. Do you know there's a tree right in the middle? It's the tree they hung Jesus on. Because if Jesus hadn't been hung on a tree as our sacrifice, we would never have access to the tree of life. Because we sinned at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The only way God, an infinitely just God, could allow us to have access to the tree of life again is if he took our punishment on himself on that tree at Calvary. But if you were making this up, you would never do this. Now, there's a lot more embarrassing details in the text, but we've got to move on to one more, and that's excruciating deaths. These men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by simply saying it never happened. Now, it's really important to realize this about the New Testament writers. The New Testament writers were all Jews, with the exception of Luke. Luke's the only Gentile, everybody else is a Jew. They're God's chosen people. They've had a relationship with Yahweh for at least 2,000 years. Why would these people who didn't believe a man could claim to be God? That was blasphemy. And they didn't think a man would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They knew everyone would rise from the dead at the end of time, according to Daniel 12, but they didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time. Why would these pious Jews say a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead unless a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead? What did they get? What did the New Testament writers get by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? They got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks, right? You're not going to start a new religion to get yourselves murdered, are you? Not one you can verify as being true. In fact, they had no motive, or they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. You know, I get the question, maybe you get the question if you're a Christian, are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, they're all listed in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. They're not eyewitnesses, but they corroborate what the eyewitnesses said happened. But if you really think about it, There's often an illicit assumption under that question. People are essentially saying, you really can't trust the New Testament writers because they were biased. They had an agenda. They embellished it. You got to look at the non-Christian writers to figure out what happened. If you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you realize how silly that objection is. What did these men have to gain by saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? Nothing. They had everything to lose by saying Jesus had risen from the dead. How many people know my friend J. Warner Wallace? Have you guys heard about this guy? Okay, cold case homicide detective who's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders decades old. He's also a Christian who took his cold case skills to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. So his book is called Cold Case Christianity. ColdCaseChristianity.com is the website. You ought to check it out. Anyway, Jim says whenever he finds a dead body that he knows has been murdered, he says there's only 3 reasons why that guy's dead. I don't have to chase down 1,000 motivations. It's one or more of these 3 possibilities. We talked about it earlier. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, and power will drive people to murder. In fact, sex, money, and power drive any of us to do immoral things because sex, money, and power are good things. They're so good, we'll take shortcuts to get them. So you know what Jim says? He says, if you're going to say the New Testament writers invented the whole story, you got to find one or more of those 3 motivators. So let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church as Saul. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. Why would they then go die for a known lie? You say, wait a minute, Frank, time out. If you're going to say that martyrdom somehow provides evidence for Christianity, don't you have to say martyrdom gives evidence for Islam? No. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the Muslim martyrs of today and the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times. But let me just give you the main difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. The New Testament martyrs, on the other hand, witnessed Jesus rise from the dead. They saw him risen. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody's going to die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament martyrs were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Now, last thing about this that I'm going to say is going to sound like heresy for those of you that believe the Bible's inerrant like I do, but it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they witnessed the resurrected Jesus. They didn't read about it in a book. They saw him. They touched him. They ate with him. They later wrote it down. In other words, Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event. The resurrection. There would be no series of books written by Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead. Why would they invent this? To get themselves beaten, tortured, and killed? No, I don't think so. In fact, we could put it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have these documents written by Jews in the first century unless this really happened. You with me on this? You guys still here? Now, there's a lot more evidence, but we didn't have time to go through it. It's all in the books. Let's sum up the whole argument. Does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? First argument, cosmological, beginning of the universe. Second argument, design argument. The universe is fine-tuned, and so are you. Third argument, moral argument. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible?
Big Bang.
Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Are the New Testament writers telling the truth about the resurrection? Sure seems to be. And if they are, you can show the entire Bible is true, and that's what we do in the book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. So if you want to go further, the book's available on the book table, and I want to point out all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Just so you know. I got 3 sons, so I need some help. All right? I don't have enough faith to be an atheist is out there. A 12-part, 7-hour DVD set is there. The book Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. In fact, I pulled from a lot of this book in this presentation, so you might want to check that out. But if you don't do anything else, text the word evidence to this phone number, 855-909-0582, because I'm going to send you this entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format and about 5 other PowerPoint presentations for free in a PDF format. All you need to do is text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. And folks watching out there in internet land can do the same thing, and we'll send it to you for free. So everything I talked about, and by the way, I only showed you maybe 50 slides. The whole presentation has 362 slides. So if you want to check it out, just text that word evidence to that phone number, 855-909-0582. All right? Now, last thing. It's true. So what? So what if Christianity is true? Well, the best news ever. Somebody actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in the Navy to earn than a golden trident. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through, maybe 5%. Those that do make it through and earn that trident, wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and they pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed for them, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to put our identity in the one that died for us, the one that sacrificed for us, the one that created us. But our culture says, oh, no, put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your ethnic group, or put your identity in your gender identity, or put your identity in your sexual preference, or put your identity in your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your vocation or your job or your bank account. Do you realize, ladies and gentlemen, none of those things are ultimate? If you put your identity in your sexual preference, what happens when you can no longer sexually perform, or you're no longer sexually preferred? Do you no longer have an identity? If you put your identity in your job and you lose your job, you no longer have an identity. You put your identity in another person. What happens if that other person dies or leaves you? You no longer have an identity. You know, you can lose everything in this world. And unless Jesus comes before we die, we're even going to lose our lives. You know the only thing you can't lose? Is you can't lose Jesus. You can't lose him. He is your identity. You don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. See, if you have to achieve your identity, all the pressure's on you. And there's always somebody that can do it better. But what happens when you can't achieve it anymore? You no longer have an identity? No. Your identity is grounded in what he did for you. And he didn't just die, he also rose again. This is why John, who was with Jesus from the beginning, said, he has given you the right to become a child of God when you receive him. Have you received him? And if not, why not? It's a secure identity. I have a friend, she's 69 years old. She works at Starbucks, not for the money, but for the ministry. She says the other day she was in her break room. She's befriended many girls in Starbucks there who are trying to transition to become boys. And she says all they do is they sit on their iPhones and they go through TikTok video after TikTok video that tells them what they're doing is good and right. And my friend looks at them and says, when I was in high school, I did some things that I'm still paying for, and they're not nearly as dramatic as what you're trying to do. Don't do this to yourself. It's not the answer. Your identity is not in what you think about your gender or your sexual preference or any other preference. Your identity is in the designer that made you. Put your trust in him. Now, with that being said, we're going to go to questions. But before we go to questions, those of you who are here at Tech, do you realize that every Tuesday night here at 7 p.m., you can have fellowship with people who will go through material like this and also study the Bible and other things in a community where you can actually grow in your knowledge and love of God through Christ. You can do that. So every Tuesday, I just happen to be here Tuesday, but it is every Tuesday at 7. Is that right, Kevin? Shannon? And Kevin there and Shannon, they lead it. So come back next Tuesday. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to go to questions. We're going to set up a microphone because this is also on the internet. And you got to come up to the microphone, otherwise people on the internet are not going to hear you. And since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question here tonight. And so that's what the microphone's for. So we just need one person to start us out. And once we do that, everybody else who wants to ask a question will feel more emboldened. So first person, come on up. Go ahead, Michael, you be the first one. You just go right there. Right there. Michael, you might see, is wearing a very impressive shirt. Crossexamine.org. It looks like this. There you go. That's our website. Go ahead, Michael. What do you got?
I just had a question for you. Also, first, I just want to say thank you for being here. It's obviously tremendous that you came all the way out here and that you do the tour, and I just think that's tremendous being able to see you in person.
Thank you.
Also, I just wanted to say that I personally don't think that your wife had a momentary lapse of judgment, Stephanie.
Oh, yeah.
I think she chose right.
Once a day. No, but go ahead with the question.
But my question is regarding the evidence for God. Well, the evidence for God's existence. Obviously, I was wondering if you considered changed hearts to be especially atheists that do actual unbiased research by scrutinizing each religion similarly. Basically, do you consider changed hearts to be evidence for God? And I'm gonna.
Do I consider changed hearts to be evidence for God?
Yeah.
Yes, but it's not the best evidence, I think, because for many that seems to be a subjective change, right? I think it's true, and I think the witness of the Holy Spirit is true, and I think God does change lives, but you could also say the Nation of Islam changes lives. It's just for a different reason, okay? Christianity is really the only religious worldview that has the kind of evidence that can show the entire system is true. You see, I think most religious systems are in error, but they have some truth in them. I think Christianity is true, even though I might have some errors about Christianity in my mind, minor errors. In other words, Christianity is a system of truth with some error, whereby I think other religious worldviews are a system of error with some truth. Because, like say Islam, Islam has some truth in it. It believes in God. It believes we ought to pray. It believes we ought to give 2.5% of our income, just like Christians believe. Okay?
Right. Yeah, you knew about, remember, there's this guy, Nabil Qureshi. He
Yes.
did the Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus,
Yeah.
and he changed, like, his religion.
Right.
And, so
yeah,
I thought that
Nabil,
was
but when
pretty
I
cool.
knew Nabil, Nabil actually had a miraculous experience where he had a vision that, and many Muslims are saying that people that came to faith through these experiences because they came from a Muslim land and Jesus either appeared to them or a dream or a vision. So there are people that are coming to faith that way. All right?
Cool. I just have one follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Okay, I know there's
Go
a
quickly,
line
go
behind
ahead.
me. I'm going to go pretty quickly. Also, I wanted to say thank you again. About a month ago, you came out to, we talked about this a little earlier. About a month ago, you actually went out to Liberty University, which is where I'm attending seminary. We talked about that earlier. So, and you spoke about the, it was the
Legislating morality.
You're right.
Yeah.
You know, how you can't not legislate morality. And I just had a general question. What do you think, just in your analysis, what is the biblical age of adulthood, and should adulthood be determined by biology, or should it be determined by the culture?
The Bible talks about an age of accountability. In fact, talks about it in, I think, Isaiah 7 or 8, but doesn't give a certain age. I think
Right,
it
which is
depends.
my question.
It depends on how people are brought up in a culture. You know, our culture, maybe women become adults at 16 or 17, men 37 or 38.
Right.
They're still playing video games in their mother's basement. So it really depends on the individual, how mature they are.
Yeah, I
Thank
thought that
you,
was
Michael.
pretty interesting because they keep changing their rights and everything. Like,
That's
hey,
right.
kids they could change their consider changing gender, but it's like what? Like no, they can't even vote. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
I love you, by the way. You're
Thank you,
awesome.
brother. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hello.
I got you.
I can turn it that way.
Yeah. Clint's the professional here.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. This is the great Clint Boland, ladies and gentlemen. There he is right there.
Thank you,
By the
Clint.
way, the people that are watching out there, the reason you can see this is because Clint Boland shows up with a couple of cases and a backpack, and you would think that ESPN was here because he's got like 37 cameras and he controls it all from his iPad. He's a genius. There he is right there. All right, anyway, go ahead.
I know that a lot of our school systems are moving completely, honestly, away from Christianity, at least in the public
Yes.
realm. So if a student was asked to write a paper supporting evolution, the evolution of humans, what would you say to help her? She's a Christian, so what would you say to her in writing the paper that would help her?
I would say look at the evidence honestly and write, here's what people say is evidence for evolution, for macroevolution. Write that in there. And then say, here are some reasons why I don't think it's persuasive evidence. That's what I would do. Because obviously scientists are thinking that it's true for a reason. And generally the two reasons are homology and DNA. Homology is the body structure. You know, we kind of do look like apes. Maybe there's an ancestor relationship. And we do share a common genetic code. Maybe that's because we have a common ancestor. And that's possible. But I think, I mentioned earlier that scientists sometimes philosophically rule out evidence or a possibility before they look at the evidence. And there's only two possible causes for life. Either it was an intelligent cause or a natural cause, a non-intelligent cause. And many scientists who are atheistic will rule out intelligent causes before they look at the evidence. So is it any wonder they always conclude it has to be a natural cause that brought the first life and brought new life forms? Now, technically, evolution does not tell you how life got here originally. Even Richard Dawkins will admit nobody knows how the first life got here, but they're trying to say that subsequent life and new life forms came through some sort of natural process. And I think not only is there not good evidence for that, I think there's evidence against that. And
Thank
we
you.
have it in the book Stealing from God. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. By the way, just to keep Clint working, I want you guys to arrange yourself by short, tall, short, tall, short, tall. Okay? All right.
All right.
Yes, sir. What's
First,
your name?
thanks for all you do. Such a blessing.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Brad.
Brad, go ahead.
My question is around age of the earth.
Yes.
What would you say to people? I lean old earth, but what would you say to people who say that a simple, clear reading of Genesis 1 and 2 is very straightforward, and if you don't get all the skeptical science involved, it's a young earth, literal 24-hour days?
Let me say first that I'm absolutely convinced the universe is at least 61 years old. I'm going to throw my mom in there. It's at least 85. All right. I think that is one way to interpret Genesis 1. They could be right from a look at Genesis 1, but I don't think it's the only way. Here's why. What does the first verse of the Bible say?
In the beginning, God created.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, there was no Hebrew word for universe, so heavens and earth meant the universe. What's the second verse? Anyone know? And the earth was formless and void, right? So the first verse talks about the entire universe being created, and then the second verse zeroes in on earth. If you want to take a hyper-literal view of Genesis 1, the heavens and the earth, the universe is created before the days ever begin. The days don't begin till verse 3. So, what's happened between verse 1 and verse 2? It doesn't even say. And it says, when did God create? In the beginning. Doesn't say when the beginning was. I mean, you could interpret it that way, but you could also interpret it by saying, look, the heavens and the earth are created before the days ever begin. And by the way, it was Augustine who thought this. This is long before modern science. He didn't think that Genesis 1 was telling us how old the universe is. You know what I really think Genesis 1 is? It's a polemic against the Egyptian creation story. Because remember, the Bible was not written to you. It was written for you. Who is it written to? Who is Genesis written to? It's written to Jews or Hebrews who are wandering through the desert after they just left Egypt. Now, when they're walking through the desert, they're not asking the questions we're asking. They're not walking through the desert going, I wonder how old this place is. You know, that's not their question. Their question is Yahweh the true God or are the Egyptian gods the true God? And if you look at Egyptian creation stories, these gods somehow already exist. They're finite gods. And they struggle. They have to fight one another to bring order to chaos. Moses comes along and says, nope, God's outside the universe. He just speaks and he brings order to chaos. He doesn't have to fight anyone. So it's a polemic, in other words, a corrective of the Egyptian creation story. And it's told in a poetic way, even though it's not Hebrew poetry. So I think the better evidence overall is that the universe is old, but I don't care if it's old or young.
Right.
You need a creator no matter how far back you go, right?
Right.
All right, thanks,
Thank
Brad. Yes, sir.
Hello.
See, he did it. He's shorter. There you go. What's your name?
I'm Bonnie, and
Yes, sir.
sorry, it's a question that has been racing in my mind for a while, but
That's okay, go
I
ahead.
couldn't find anyone to ask this question. So I'm Hindu, but I grew up in a country of Muslim majority,
Yes.
and almost all my close friends are Muslims.
Okay.
So one argument I heard from them, some of them actually, is all humans are by-born Muslims.
All
God
humans are what?
by-born Muslims.
They're born Muslims?
Like, in nature, they are Muslims.
But how can anybody be born knowing about Allah, knowing about Muhammad, and knowing about the Quran? Why would they say that?
Yes. So I can be misquoting them, so I'm sorry if I am.
Okay,
but-
all right.
So what they say is God or Allah has been sending hundreds of thousands of prophets to each and every part of the world to spread the same message. But with time, people lost their ways. So if that is true, my first part of the question is, does Christians also believe that all humans are by-born Christians? If not, then what happens to the people who were born before Jesus and never got to know about him or the Bible? Do they go to hell?
Yeah, great question. Okay, the first part of this is when somebody says something, it's not your job to tell them why they're wrong. It's their job to tell them why they're right. So you should ask your Muslim friends, first of all, what do you mean by everyone's a Muslim when they're born? And then secondly, how did you come to that conclusion? In other words, what evidence do you have for that position? And see what they say, okay? Christians do not believe that people are born Christians. What we believe is that people, as soon as they're old enough to know what God means and to know what creation means, they know God is the creator. Now, they don't know that this is the Christian God, but they know by effects, like we talked about earlier, that every effect has to have a cause. And this is what Paul actually says in Romans chapter 1. He says the Gentile, well, he says that God's invisible qualities and his acts are clearly seen so that men are without excuse through what has been made, through the creation. Because we have a creation, so there must be a creator. For us to know that Jesus and the Christian God is the creator, we need some historical information to see whether Jesus rose from the dead. Now, some Christians will say the Holy Spirit can give you that information, and if you're seeking it, he will. That's what the Bible seems to say. But you still need to know about Jesus. So what happened before Jesus came to earth, and what the scriptures seem to say, although it doesn't exhaustively reveal this, if you remember, if you know anything about the scripture, the Christian scriptures, Paul, the writer of a lot of the New Testament, says the gospel was preached to Abraham. That Abraham knew that he was saved, not because he knew Jesus, but because he believed in Yahweh, he believed in God. And so a payment that would come 2,000 years after Jesus was applied to Abraham, I said 2,000 years after Abraham, was applied to Abraham even though it hadn't happened yet, okay? So anybody that makes it to heaven is making it to heaven because of the sacrifice that Jesus provided, even people that came before Jesus. The question is, how much knowledge did they have to have in order to acquire that? And it seems like they didn't know the name of Jesus. It appears the New Testament saying after Jesus comes, you need to know the name, but before, you just need to know, throw yourself on the mercy of God, the mercy of Yahweh, okay?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, excellent question. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
If I gave you a book, would you read it?
Definitely. And I have some of my Christian friends who gave me several Bibles, and I do read them.
Oh, excellent. I want to give you, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, so would you go out to that book table and just grab one?
Sure.
All right. God bless you.
You too.
Thank you for being here.
Hello, Dr. Turek. How are you?
Great. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Travis.
Travis, go ahead.
Okay, so I believe it was in chapter 9 of your book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, that it talks about, like, who is Jesus, God or a great moral teacher. Yeah. And so my question is from that, like, people will say that there are other great moral teachers besides Jesus, like Mother Teresa or Gandhi. And so my question is like, how would you approach that particular argument of him just being a great moral teacher? And also, too, how would you approach the fact that people would more than likely follow what Gandhi or Mother Teresa says, but not Jesus?
You know, I just can't say anything better than C.S. Lewis, so I won't even try. I'm just going to show you what C.S. Lewis said about when people claim, oh, Jesus is just a great moral teacher. Here's what he said. He said, I'm trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish things that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus is a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would rather be a lunatic on the level with a man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can spit at him for a fool, or you can shut him up for a fool. You can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. I mean, Jesus said things like, before Abraham was born, I am. He's claiming to be Yahweh there. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Jesus said, if you pray in my name, you'll have access to God. Jesus said, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Can you imagine if any other human being said that? Would you say, hey, this guy's a great moral teacher? This guy's a nutcase, or he's God. One of the two. And that's what Lewis is saying here.
It's ironic because I just read Mere Christianity and finished it this past weekend. It's a really good book.
Yeah, it's an excellent book. Any of you who haven't read Mere Christianity, consider yourself underinformed. You need to read it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. Great question. Yes, sir.
Howdy, Dr. Frank. My name is Kyle, and I'm coming in all the way from Eris. I drove about 30 minutes to try to ask you this question and was thinking about it on the car ride all the way over here, but I wanted to learn a little bit more about you and why you got into Christianity in the first place. Because understandably, someone in your field studies and looks at all these different facts, all of this information, and it can lead you to a lot of different conclusions. And I was just curious, as a big-time fan of Cross-Examine, because ever since the senior video like years ago and was introduced to it through YouTube's algorithm, I've just always wanted to know a lot more about you, and I never found a lot of videos on that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that, brother. Well, I was brought up in New Jersey, and I was Catholic because it's the law.
Same.
You're either Catholic or Jewish in New Jersey. And I went to Catholic high school, and I always knew God existed. There had to be a first cause.
Right.
I was Romans 1. I knew there had to be a cause of all this. There had to be a God. I prayed to God, but I never really knew who Jesus was. And it wasn't until I went after college into the Navy, I met the son of a Methodist minister, and I had so many questions for him. He finally said, look, you just need to get Josh McDowell books, Evidence Demands a Verdict and More Than a Carpenter, which were books written in the 70s by Josh McDowell, who's still around. Josh is like 83, 84 years old now. His son, Sean McDowell, is also an apologist. Anyway, I read those books and I said, wow, Christianity appears to be true. After the Navy, I met Norman Geisler, who at the time was the Michael Jordan of apologetics. And he was starting a seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. So 30 years ago, my wife and I and our 3 kids moved to Charlotte to go to that seminary. And then I began to work with Dr. Geisler a little bit, wrote a couple of books. Of course, one of them is called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And then we started Cross-Examine in 2006. And we've been going to colleges, high schools, and churches ever since.
Whoa, okay. There any chance you might be willing to go over to the assembly or possibly do another one of these seminars in the ULM area? Only reason why I was asking is because those are the only areas I'm really close to, and I would love to talk with you more after
Well,
this,
if you go to crossexamine.org, and this is true of people out here, people watching out there, just go to invite us to campus or invite us to a church at crossexamine.org, and we'll see about coming. That's what we do. So,
Sure
yeah,
thing.
thank you.
I was
Thanks,
going to
Kyle.
say there's one other pastor I know of that might be interested in having a dialogue with you in the future. His name is Shane Warren. I've followed him ever since he was in the assembly at Monroe a few years back. He's really good on facts, spiritualism, and everything in between, and I feel like a dialogue between the two of you would be like one of the best crossover episodes I've seen in Christianity. You know, that's just me, but anyway, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, man. Appreciate it. Yes, sir. Thanks for coming.
Hey, my name is Caden. He had virtually the same question as me, but I was going to walk away, and I was like, I kind of have like another question too.
All right.
So I wasn't really aware of who you were until I like sat down. My friend called me and he was like, hey, do you want to go to this with me? And I was like, yeah, sure. But we have like a lot of friends here that kind of fall into like an agnostic belief. Like they're not Christian, but they don't like necessarily call themselves atheists. And I just had like, you mentioned in the PowerPoint at some point that there was someone who was atheist, and then they were like, eventually they said, you know, the evidence here kind of like contradicts myself, like his argument. And I wanted to say like, or I wanted to ask if there was any like, I don't know, any sort of like stuff you could talk to them about that would like not result in an argument kind of a thing.
Well, I think the question you want to start with is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Because if the person hesitates or says no, it doesn't matter how much evidence you give them. In fact, the more evidence you give them, the more annoyed they're going to get with you. They don't want evidence. They're running from God. They don't want you pursuing them. So if they're open, great. Then why don't we do a study on it and see if it is true? If they're not open, I think there are 4 things you can do, maybe more. I'm just thinking of 4 things. Number 1 is you can pray for them. Number 2, you can plant seeds every now and then that show them their worldview is wrong and Christianity is true. Number 3, you can love them, which doesn't mean you approve of everything they do, as I mentioned earlier. And number 4, you can wait. Why wait? Because if that person's ever going to be open, it's probably going to be when tragedy strikes, because tragedy strikes us all at some point. We live in a fallen world. When tragedy strikes, if that person's open, your phone's going to ring and that person's going to be on the other end. When the student's ready, the teacher will appear. They're not going to call their atheist friend when things go wrong. What's the atheist friend going to say? Well, there's no rhyme or reason to life. This stuff just happens. No, they're going to call you a person of spiritual depth. So do those 4 things. But just cut right to the chase. If this really were true, would you follow Jesus? Most of the time, I think the answer is going to be no. So, in fact, let me just do a quick informal survey while we're here. This question is just for Christians. If you're not a Christian, thank you for being here, but it's not a question for you. Christians, I want you to think of somebody you know who's not a Christian, whom you'd like to be a Christian. Friend, relative, somebody like that. Everybody got somebody? Everybody got somebody? Okay, don't point at him. All right. Is the person you're thinking of on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know if Christianity is true. Or are they apathetic or maybe even hostile to Christianity? How many people say the person I'm thinking of is on a relentless pursuit of truth? 1.5 hands. How many people say the person I'm thinking of is apathetic or hostile? Look around the room. As I mentioned earlier, most people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. They're not interested. They're running. And by the way, those you are Christians in here, I bet most of you were running at some point in your life too, weren't you? So why do you expect everybody to believe exactly the way you believe when you didn't even agree with you 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? Some of you are old enough for that. Right? Everybody's at a different point of spiritual development. You shouldn't expect everybody to agree with you right now. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Right, thank you.
Hi,
Narnia of the North. Yes, what's your name?
I'm Julianne.
Julianne, go ahead.
And I love watching your cross-examine videos. And
thank you.
My question is, how would you respond to someone who says that we can only interpret Scripture using Scripture, and so we can't bring in science or history? Like, we've got to only use the Scripture to interpret Scripture. What do you think about that?
I would ask them, what do they mean by that? And how did they come to that conclusion? They're imposing their own philosophy on the text, which everyone has to impose some philosophy. It's true you can impose bad philosophy, but it's not true you can impose no philosophy, no perspective, right? I think for some of the scriptures you have to have some historical knowledge, right? For example, I just mentioned Genesis 1. It appears to be a corrective to the Egyptian creation story. That might help you understand why it's written that way. When you go to Jeremiah 29:11, what I mentioned earlier, you have to know the context. Why is Jeremiah saying he's getting a letter from the Lord to write to these people that went to Babylon? Because there was an exile and God wants to bring them back after 70 years. So he's writing that letter. Tragically, a lot of us look at that and say, oh, that's a promise for me. No, it's not a promise for you. It's a promise for them. Okay? So we have to use certain principles to understand what's going on. By the way, this is not just true of the Bible. It's true of any written text. Sometimes you need historical knowledge to know what's going on, right? In order to try and figure out what happened. In fact, let me just give you an example of this. What is this? What's this about?
Titanic.
What's the Titanic? How do you know it's a boat? That's a picture, but how do you know it's referring to that? You're bringing some knowledge that you already have when you read that headline, aren't you? You're bringing some knowledge. In fact, you're also bringing your knowledge of grammar, and your knowledge of logic to know what this means. So you're always bringing certain presuppositions to the text. And that includes grammar, includes logic, includes cause and effect. Let's just think of the first verse of the Bible for a second. We just talked about it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What does that verse assume you already know? Assumes you know logic, assumes you know grammar, it assumes you know what a beginning is, it assumes you have some idea of what this word God means, it assumes you know cause and effect, right? There's a lot of assumptions that go into just understanding that. And this is, by the way, I'm trying to unpack what all these assumptions are, and the study of this in seminary, they call this prolegomena. It's what you do before you do theology. Before you ever get to the Bible, you've got to know all these things before you ever get to the Bible. So to say that we can't bring any other knowledge to the Bible, that would be impossible. There's certain knowledge you have to bring to understand any of it. Make sense?
Yes,
thank you, Julianne. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hey, I'm John Davis.
Doug, go ahead.
Also, this is like the first time I've ever seen you or heard of you, and you're pretty good.
Did my mom just text you to say that? No, okay,
I swear,
good.
no. Okay, so my question, recently in the past 2 months is when I've been starting to really dig into like scripture. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's stories that you've known since you were a kid, like the story of Moses freeing the Israelites from Egypt and Father Abraham. And in those stories, it's always God is speaking to them, telling them what they need to do because God has a purpose for them.
Right.
And so I know in the Bible it goes through, there's the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. All three are the same. In the beginning is God, and during the New Testament we have Jesus. Mm-hmm. And after the Great Commission and Jesus ascends into heaven, we're left with the Spirit, and the Spirit resides around us and within us. So my question is, so there's not many examples, but there's like, the first thing I thought of was the book that was published in 2010, Heaven is Real. It was
There's not many examples of what, Doug? What are you saying?
Like people having revelations.
Oh,
by
okay.
God
Well,
in
yeah,
modern day.
and that's because.
I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Yeah, well, notice that the revelation that we call the Old Testament spanned several thousand years. I mean, just from Abraham to Jesus is 2,000 years. But how much revelation did those people get? Actually, not a lot. In fact, there weren't a lot of miracles in the Bible. What? What are you talking about? Let's just go from Abraham to Jesus. That's 2,000 years. Do you know how many miracles occurred or how many miracles there are in the entire Bible? Approximately? About 250. Now, it's hard to count. Sometimes they're bunched up. But if you have 250 miracles just from Abraham to Jesus, how often do you get a miracle? Homeschoolers, do the math.
Not often.
You get a miracle every 8 years. Does that sound like a lot? No. But do they happen every 8 years? You get a miracle 8 years later, you get another one 8 years. No. They're bunched, as I mentioned earlier, around Moses, around Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Okay? So when we're reading the Bible, we may skip over hundreds of years and forget there's nothing going on. God was revealing certain things to people over those 2,000 years, but it wasn't 2,000 years of continuous new revelation. Things were poured out to people at certain times, a very select group of people. And once all that revelation came and was confirmed by miracles, God doesn't need to do any other miracles to confirm any new revelation. In fact, there could be no miracles since Jesus and the apostles, as I mentioned earlier, and Christianity would still be true. I think there have been miracles. In fact, the great scholar Craig Keener, who teaches at Asbury University, did all the research and wrote a hernia-inducing 2-volume set called Miracles, Modern Day Miracles. But even if he's wrong on that, Christianity would still be true if Jesus rose from the dead and the other miracles associated with him are true. So I think when we look at the Bible, we think God is revealing stuff to people every day. He's not. And I don't think we need any further revelation. I can't even keep up with the current revelation, right? The Bible's a big enough book. I can't master the whole thing myself. Why am I asking for new truth? I always think, when we ask God, I need some new truth, he looks down at us, how are you doing with the old truth? Not so good, Lord. Okay, once you get that down, I'll send you more, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Doug. Yes, ma'am, what's your name?
Hello, my name is Emily.
Emily, go ahead.
You've given us a lot of great tools to talk to people who are atheists or agnostic. But what about defending the faith to people who proclaim to be Christians? We get a lot of people with really angry signs and a lot of yelling on campus, even just today. And is there any merit in having conversations with them? And if there is merit in having conversations with them, how would we go about that?
There's a book written by my friend Greg Kokel called Tactics. I don't know if you have the book.
I don't, but...
You really need to get the book.
Okay.
Because without reading that book, you can't be saved. Look, I don't make the rules up. I don't make the rules. I'm just telling you, okay?
Got it. Sounds good.
Right after I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, you got to read that. No. Greg does a really good job of how to converse with people, so I highly recommend you get the book. In fact, I've mentioned a couple of the questions he says you ought to ask people. What do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? If you get our app, the Cross-Examined app, 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined, we have many questions you ought to ask other people to have conversations. So yeah, I think you want to have questions with people until the point where they become what Greg would call a steamroller, where they won't let you talk, or they're yelling at you. Then you just politely say, well, maybe we can talk another time, thank you, and you move on.
Yeah.
Okay? So, and Jesus even kind of said the same thing when he sent out the 70. If you go to a town and they welcome you, okay, talk with them. If you go there and you try and present, and they reject you, kick the dust off your sandals and move to the next town. Don't cast your pearls before swine. So there is a point where you're going to say it's not worth anyone's time to continue. That's why I always ask the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Yeah.
If they hesitate or say no, move on.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Lawton. How you doing, doctor?
Good. How you doing?
Lost son with an
Lost
S.
son. All right.
That's
I was
okay.
close.
I've been on my relentless pursuit of truth for the last couple of years now, and I've got.
Hey, wait a minute! You guys can't stay for 4 hours? I don't get it. All right, so go ahead, Lawson.
I've got a ton of questions here that I'd love to ask, but I'm
Start
pretty.
with one, 'cause I'm running out of voice.
No. I understand.
I'm running out of voice.
I'm lucky. I've got people back at home who can help me answer these questions. So
right.
I asked those people to give me their questions. Here it goes. So my pastor wants to know your thoughts on truth over experience. Experience. For example, lots of people base their beliefs based off of like their emotions, how they feel things should be. How can we help other Christians see that Jesus is all we need? Was that first question.
Well, emotion makes life fun, but logic makes life safe.
How can we help them see that?
Well, you could just ask them, have you ever followed your emotions and it later hurt you? Yes, we all have, right?
Yeah.
So emotions have a place, but not at the expense of truth. Jesus said, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free, which implies if you don't have the truth, you're in bondage. Think about, we sometimes follow our emotions right into addiction. We follow our emotions into drug abuse or alcohol abuse or pornography, and we're not free. We're enslaved to it. We can't get out of it. We might even follow our emotions into an illicit relationship, and we can't get out of it. So we have to use logic. We have to use reason and ensure that we don't follow our heart, we guard our heart. In fact, I gave a presentation this morning. Well, I gave it last week at Ohio State. It's called Finding Hope, How to Find Hope and Identity. It's on our YouTube channel. And I go through why you ought not follow your heart without moral restraint. Because if you follow your heart, you're probably going to wind up broken, addicted, alone, and prematurely dead. So the second most important verse in the Bible right now, other than the gospel, is Proverbs 4:23. Above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. Above all else, guard your heart. Don't follow your heart. Guard it.
And that's what you should tell them?
That's the truth. And a little experience, the older you get, the more you realize how true that is.
Can I ask you one more?
Sure. That's it. You're done.
That was it.
That was it.
Oh, I'm done. I can ask one more.
One more, quick one. Go.
Come on, just one more. Come on.
False. Okay, move on.
Some people say they hear the audible voice of God, but it's to my understanding that the New Testament seems to indicate that the signs of the apostles or sign gifts have ceased, and yet there's still people who claim to speak in tongues and then the slaying in the spirit type stuff that appears to be Greek pagan practices, is what my pastor said.
That's a long question. Let me give you a place you can go for an answer. Go to gotquestions.org or the app gotquestions.org. Type in the word tongues, and you're going to see a lot of different articles. You might not agree with everything they say, but I think they give a fair, logical reason, a group of reasons for their conclusion. Check that out. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Lawson. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Alora.
Hey, Laura.
So my first question, I have a friend. She's currently agnostic. She says she was raised Mormon
Yes.
and walked away from that. And she has convinced herself that there is a God. But the way she puts it, she says that she's not sure which, if any, of the world religions accurately represent him. So what could I say to her that could help show her that the God that the Bible talks about is the right one?
I would ask her, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Historic Orthodox Christianity, not Mormonism. If she says yes, then you maybe go through, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist with her. There's not one thing you can say that, oh, now she's a Christian. You're right, okay? It's probably going to be a long process. So if she's open, then ask her if she'll follow the evidence where it leads. If she's not open, you can just do those 4 things I mentioned earlier. Pray, plant seeds, love, and wait.
Okay.
Makes sense?
I also have another friend who, she was raised Buddhist.
Yes.
And she is currently, she follows Wicca, the Greek Pantheon, and Satanism all at the same time. She is not interested in the gospel. I've tried sharing the gospel with her. So what would you recommend that I could say to her? Because for her, it's not so much of a matter of, well, she doesn't believe it's true, but also for her, it's also she believes all this other stuff. And it's, yeah.
Why would she believe in Satan and not God?
I don't know. She has a really weird theology. She thinks that Satan, Lucifer, and the devil are 3 different people. So
But these
she
are
has a lot
spiritual
of
beings that she believes in, right?
I think that's how she'd put it.
All right, so where did these spiritual beings come from? They're not infinite. They were created. Where did they come from?
She would say the moon. I don't. Yeah.
You're not really
it's hard to talk to her.
You're not really dealing with reason at this point. All you can do is plant seeds and wait and pray, like as I mentioned earlier. If you've asked her the direct question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And she said no. You know, even God can't steer a parked car.
Right.
If she's going to remain parked, you just got to wait by doing those 4 things, I think.
Yeah.
All right. It's good you care for her, though.
Thank you.
So just stay in her life.
Yeah. One more. I have another friend. She is an atheist, and I actually invited her to be here tonight, and she was actually really excited to come, and she wanted to talk with the Q&A, but something came up last minute, and we're going to go back and watch the recording together.
Sure.
But obviously you can't really ask questions if you're watching a recording. So I was wondering...
She can email us questions, and if it's a good question, we'll try and address it on the podcast.
Okay.
Just go to hello@crossexamine.org. That's the email address.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. All right.
Hello, Dr. Turek.
Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
My name is Macy.
Okay,
and
Macy.
you asked the question about how many Christians in the room who know that someone is running from the truth. How do you dialogue with someone who is not running away, not searching for the truth, but is significantly attached, basically placing their identity in a person, a human being who is running from the truth?
Who is what?
Who is running from the truth?
See, that's an idol, we would say, to use religious language. She has something in her life that's more important than God. And of course, we all do at certain times, right? We put other things above God and say, if I can only have this, I would be happy. She's never going to be happy. She's going to continue to pursue something that can't fill the God void. So if that person just continues to do that, she's going to continually be frustrated with it. So you could just stay in her life until she's ready to maybe look at the truth. Now, the pastor Tim Keller, who used to be a pastor up in New York, has written some good books on this. One is called Counterfeit Gods. You may want to check that book out. And his Gospel in Life sermons are really good on issues like this, because he's really good at getting under the psychology of what people believe and why they believe it. And typically it's because we have this idol, something we want more than God. And we think it's going to make us happy and content, but it's not. All right?
Thank you.
Thanks. Great question. Hey, by the way, after Mike's the last question, because I'll be out of voice by then, and it better be short.
So I
Yes.
hope this one's short for you,
Oh, hey,
but
Ellie.
how would you describe we're both predestined by God, and we also freely choose to be saved?
We're not predestined to talk about that tonight. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, okay.
We are both chosen but free. And let me just give you two quick thoughts on this. First of all, you can listen to the podcast we just did last week with Leighton Flowers. Leighton is really good on this issue. Just go back and listen to that. It's an hour long, so I can't sum the whole thing up. But just because God knows what we're going to do doesn't mean he's causing us to do it. I know the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow, but does that mean I'm causing it to rise in the east? No. Knowledge does not necessarily imply causation. That's number one. Secondly, it's unavoidable for God, if he knows all things, that whenever he creates any universe he creates, he knows the outcome, right? Since he knows all things. If I create this universe, this is going to happen. This universe, this universe, this universe. Doesn't mean he's causing those things to happen, other than to say that he's the creator that enabled them to happen, but he's not overriding human free will to cause those things that occur in the universe, in those universes, to happen. Okay. Thirdly, and Leighton makes this point in our podcast, that the word predestined, say used in Ephesians 1, doesn't mean that we don't have free will. It means that God has guaranteed the outcome. Like he gives the example, he says, suppose a king says, okay, I've got this fortress in the middle of our jurisdiction and there's a storm coming. Anybody that gets in the fortress is predestined to survive the storm. Anybody that stays out of the fortress is going to die. You decide. Now, when the people get in that fortress, they're predestined to live. Mm-hmm. People who stay out of that fortress are predestined to die. But who's making the choices? Mm-hmm. The people are, right? So you can think of predestination, if Leighton is right about this, you can think of predestination in Ephesians 1 as that kind of sense of the word of predestination. God is guaranteeing the outcome. If you're in Christ, you're predestined to be glorified. You're predestined to be with Jesus forever. If you're outside of Christ, you're not going to be with him. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I've heard that, like, because we have a choice, it takes away from the sovereignty of God. How would you argue against that?
Yeah, that's nonsense, and here's why. If God wanted to overpower our free will, he could. But I think God is so sovereign that he can get his will done through our free will. It's the people that try and say the only way God can be sovereign is if he overpowers everyone's free will. Mm-hmm. How is that a sovereign God? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm using another illustration that Leighton Flowers gives on this podcast where he says, let's suppose you're walking down the boardwalk and you see a guy playing chess and he's playing both sides. He's playing black and white. You know, he'd make a move, then he'd go to the other side of the chessboard and he'd move that, and then he'd go back to the other side, move that. And you ask him, well, why are you doing that? Because that's the only way I can guarantee the outcome. Mm-hmm. Then you go a little bit further down the boardwalk, you see another guy playing chess, and he is defeating every single chess player that becomes his opponent. The best chess players in the world, he defeats. Who has more power?
The second.
The second guy, right? Mm-hmm. He's so good that he can even win no matter what the other guys do, what they freely do. That's more like God than the guy who's controlling everything on both sides of the board.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Yes, sir.
Thanks for your presentation. I'll try to ask this in a way that you can answer with a short answer and save your voice.
Uh-huh.
So we didn't talk a lot about the cosmological argument, but I know that, you know, in that's, you know, saying that the universe had a beginning and it came from nothing.
Right.
Now, sometimes I'll hear people say, well, actually, if you look at Big Bang cosmology, it doesn't say that it goes back to nothing. But is the reason that we know that it did because if you run the models back, you know, turn the clock back, that you get to, it's hard, I don't want to say a point, but you get back to infinite density.
Yeah,
and you can't have a physically infinite anything?
That's right.
Okay.
You get back to a point where space, time, and matter go to zero. So physics prior to Planck time is zero. There's no space, time, or matter. The second, one of the other reasons we know it came from nothing is matter, by definition, is not eternal. Mm-hmm. It had to have a beginning. And matter is composed. Well, you can't go on an infinite regress of composers. Ultimately, you got to get back to an uncomposed composer that put together the initial matter at the creation point. So either way, you're getting back to nothing. This is what theologians will say. And even atheists, I don't know if I have any quotes here, but Paul Davies, who is a agnostic from Arizona State, talks about how this universe came into existence from nothing. In fact, here is what these guys are classical physicists, astronomers like Arthur Eddington was a contemporary of Einstein. He said the beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural. Because if all of nature had a beginning, what could have caused that? Mm-hmm. Not more nature, there was no nature. Can't be a natural cause, got to be something beyond a natural cause. This is Arno Penzias, who discovered the radiation afterglow for the Big Bang. Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which is created out of nothing, one with a very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. Robert Jastrow, an agnostic astronomer, said that there are what anyone else would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. So he's an agnostic, or was an agnostic, and they're saying, look, there's something outside of nature that got all this going.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. All right, last question, Michael. Go ahead.
Man, first and the last. That's the seminary thing, I guess. Anyway, first of all, again, I just want to say thank you again for coming here. I'll try to keep this brief as I can. My question regards archaeology. Earlier today, I shared with you that I've been serving in the Air Force for 19 years, traveled to 17 countries, into all kinds of things. Even met my Okinawan wife while stationed in Japan. Konnichiwa, kaori-chan, watashi wa nata o aite imasu, amae kokoro. I say all that to say that you've also traveled a lot, such as to Israel and a few other places. You can see this on, Cross-Examine. But I wanted to ask, what has been the most compelling place or evidence that you've seen over there to support the truth of the Bible, or at least what has made the most impact on you as a Christian? If you've never heard of it before, there's also this resource called Expedition Bible. It's a great resource. This guy, Joel P. Kramer, he's an adjunct professor of, I think you're from North Carolina, somewhere over there now, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to pick one thing.
Yeah.
But let me just show you guys a pretty spectacular archaeological find.
I've been getting more interested in that. I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
The one I want to show you just very briefly, because I'm running out of energy here, is this. This is the ossuary of Caiaphas. Who's Caiaphas? Caiaphas was the guy that sentenced Jesus to die. In 1990, they discovered his burial box. This is called an ossuary. About a year after somebody died in Israel, they would go in and get the bones, that's all that was left, and then they put them in this limestone box called an ossuary. And in 1990, they discovered this ornate ossuary, and on the side of it, it shows that this is actually the burial box of Caiaphas, the guy that sentenced Jesus to die. He's the high priest. We have his bones. In fact, here is where it is. I don't know if you can hear this. Is that working back there? This guy is Johann. That's the pilot inscription. That's the real ossuary.
How spectacular it is compared to the common man's ossuary. And they know this is Caiaphas' ossuary because it has an inscription on the side that identifies it as Joseph, son of Caiaphas.
In fact, it amazes me that, you see that thing? It's not even behind glass. You could touch it, but if you did, you'd probably be shot. Okay, so all this stuff is right there. In fact, on this one wall in the Israel Museum, you've got the Caiaphas ossuary, the Pilate stone, where we have an inscription of Pilate. Next to that was that ossuary you just saw, that one that wasn't ornate. That was the ossuary of the guy who was crucified, Johannan. And we have his heel bone. This is the heel bone. Hang on a second. This is the heel bone right here. This is just a mock-up to show you the angle of the nail going through the heel bone. That's the real first century crucified victim. All right. Thanks, Michael. All right. One more question. That's it. We got to go.
And thanks again to Jorge, your buddy. Jorge.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your time. My name is Amber, and a couple of years ago, the Lord removed me from my Christian bubble of the business that I owned and thrust me into a very liberal department in a university. I love each and every one of my students because I choose to. And I want to share with them they're very, very lost. But there is the legality of the fact that I'm their instructor, and I cannot. So do you have any recommendations?
Are you a university instructor?
I am.
Well,
Not here.
You can say whatever you want.
I can.
Yeah.
Okay. I was not told that where I work, so.
Why can't you?
I don't know.
It's called academic freedom.
Okay.
So yeah, you can say whatever you want.
I haven't known who to ask that question to because it's not well supported in the department that I'm in. And so it's kind of a, and every person in the room besides me is very outspoken about atheism and what their beliefs are, and I feel like I have to completely be silent.
No, you may take heat when you do reveal what you believe.
Yeah.
But I would say, what happened to inclusion, tolerance, and diversity? Why are all these other ideas included and tolerated, but mine aren't?
So to the students, I can speak about it.
Of course you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I mean, now if you run into trouble with that, you want to contact the Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF. They're out of Phoenix, Arizona. They're a bunch of Christian attorneys. And you might want to go to their website even before you reveal any of this and look through what they have there, because they would represent you if somebody tried to, shut you down.
Okay.
Because
these students are lost and searching, and I feel like there's just been this.
What subject do you teach?
I teach dance. And so I'm a dance instructor at a university. Yeah. And so, I'm very, very close to my students, love them very much, pray for them all the time, show them in every single way that the Lord loves them, because they're very lost and they're searching for their identity in all ways. And I have the words I would love to say to them, and I have just felt as though I cannot. I was not aware that I could.
No, you can. There's nothing that stops you from.
Thank you.
Now, your department head might not like it.
Probably
do you have tenure or something?
No, I actually owned a dance studio for about 25 years and raised lots and lots of kiddos through that. And I sold my business, and the Lord took me there. I'm just adjunct. I've been there for 2 years.
Well, they might still fire you.
Yeah, they might fire me.
But you still have the capacity to do that.
Thank
There's
you.
nothing illegal about it.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right.
That's the answer I needed.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. We got to go. Okay. So we can talk privately, but I've got to go. Thank